The morning sun filtered through the curtains as I awoke to the sound of my wife's soft laughter. It wasn't the usual laughter I'd heard before. It was different, hushed, almost secretive. A slight unease crept into my chest as I looked over at her. She was sitting up in bed, scrolling through her phone, a smile on her face. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. My wife, Laura, was always the picture of loyalty and love. At least, that's what I believed. But recently, her behavior had shifted. She had started spending more time on her phone, texting late into the night, and her usual attention to me seemed to be slipping. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something was off. I decided to confront her, but before I could, a new name began popping up on her phone screen: James. At first, I thought it was a colleague, but as the days went on, the texts became more frequent, and the tone seemed increasingly intimate. The nagging feeling in the back of my mind grew into something more urgent, something that couldn't be ignored. I had to find out what was going on. So, one night, when she was asleep, I took her phone and scrolled through the messages. What I read sent shockwaves through my body. The messages between her and James were flirtatious, full of innuendos and shared moments that I had never been part of. The last few months of our marriage, I realized, had been a lie. Laura had been seeing James, a man she referred to as Alpha. The messages were full of praise for him, his confidence, his strength, his presence. I was nothing compared to him. It seemed Laura had become captivated by this Alpha who had promised her excitement, passion, and power. Everything she felt was lacking in our relationship. The texts didn't just reflect a physical affair. They were psychological. James had convinced her that I was weak, that I couldn't provide the adventure she craved, and that I was no longer worthy of her love. The humiliation was unbearable. I was furious, heartbroken, and deeply ashamed of how blind I had been. But I wasn't going to let this slide. I was not going to be humiliated by some arrogant man who thought he could steal my wife. I spent the next few weeks devising a plan, one that would show both James and Laura that I wasn't the man they thought I was. I wasn't weak, and I was certainly not someone to be discarded like some forgotten afterthought. The first step was to confront Laura. I caught her in a lie, making up an excuse about where she had been that day. Her face turned pale when I showed her the text. There was no denying it. The guilt, the shame, it all flooded over her as she tried to explain. But the words seemed empty. I could see the way she hesitated. The hesitation that came from the realization that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I could have walked away right then and there. But I wanted more. I wanted revenge. I wanted to humiliate James as he had humiliated me. I called him. He answered with that confident, almost mocking tone in his voice. "You must be Laura's husband," he said, almost too pleased with himself. "She talks about you. Poor guy. Always in her shadow." I kept my cool. "I'm going to show you what happens when you try to take what isn't yours." The plan was simple. I would make sure that James and Laura both understood that I wasn't just some passive victim. I had something more powerful, something they didn't see coming. Over the next few days, I manipulated situations so that James would be forced to meet me. At first, he was dismissive, but then I hit him where it hurt the most: his ego. I made it clear that Laura's attention was no longer his for the taking, that despite everything he claimed to be, he was just another man who thought he could take what wasn't his. I arranged for him to be humiliated in front of his closest friends, a group he considered his loyal followers. It was subtle, but effective. I planted seeds of doubt about his character, made sure his supposed alpha status began to crumble. The humiliation I had suffered was nothing compared to the psychological torment I made sure he endured. As for Laura, she watched helplessly as I took control of the situation. She had no choice but to face the consequences of her betrayal. She begged for forgiveness, but the damage had already been done. I had exposed both her weakness and her lover's true nature. In the end, Laura realized the truth. She had thrown away something real for an illusion. And James? He learned that no matter how alpha you think you are, nothing can shield you from the consequences of your actions. I had exacted my revenge. And while it wasn't about revenge for its own sake, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my power, and my self-respect. After everything had unfolded, I thought the worst was over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't completely finished what I had started. The sense of betrayal still lingered. The sting of her lies and his arrogance still gnawed at me. I had exposed their flaws, sure, but I realized that the final step in my revenge wasn't just about humiliating James or confronting Laura. It was about showing them that I was better off without them. I didn't want them to think they could just walk away from this, that they could move on and live their lives while I remained the fool in their rearview mirror. I had to show them the consequences of crossing someone like me, someone who had once been underestimated and forgotten, but who had now risen stronger, smarter, and more focused than ever before. So, I started making moves in my own life that left both of them in the dust. First, I took my career to the next level. While Laura was wrapped up in the aftermath of her choices, scrambling to salvage what was left of our relationship, I made sure to get the promotion I'd been eyeing for months. I dove into my work with a new sense of purpose, pulling in connections that would further my success and put me on a path to financial independence. I didn't need her for security. I was building my own empire. Then, I started living for myself. I began hitting the gym more often, getting into the best shape of my life. It was empowering, watching myself grow stronger both physically and mentally. I took up hobbies I had always neglected: painting, photography, and even learning how to play the piano. Things I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I was becoming the version of myself I'd long since forgotten existed. I also started dating again, just casually at first. I didn't rush into anything serious, but the boost to my confidence was undeniable. Women seemed to gravitate toward me, and I could see the jealousy in Laura's eyes when she realized I wasn't the man she had left behind. She would call and text, desperate to get back together, but each time I would politely ignore her or give vague responses. The more I distanced myself from her, the more she seemed to realize what she had lost. James, on the other hand, wasn't as bold as he had once been. After our encounter, his confidence had taken a hit. He no longer walked around with that smug alpha swagger. He had lost his edge. People started questioning his integrity, and his so-called followers began to dwindle. Rumors swirled about his treatment of women, about his manipulative tendencies, and I made sure those rumors reached the right ears. It didn't take long before his reputation was tarnished, his so-called alpha persona crumbling under the weight of his own lies. As for Laura, the woman who had once been the love of my life, she watched helplessly as everything she thought she could control slipped through her fingers. Every time she saw me excelling, becoming the man I had always been capable of, she realized she had made a grave mistake. But I wasn't about to offer her any redemption. She had chosen her path, and now she had to live with the consequences. In a final act of closure, I invited both of them to a gathering, a dinner with friends where I would showcase how much my life had improved without them. Laura, hoping for some form of reconciliation, arrived early, and I could see the pain in her eyes as she watched me mingle with friends, laughing, enjoying my life. James showed up late, wearing his usual bravado, but it was clear to everyone in the room that he had nothing left to stand on. I didn't say a word to either of them that night. I didn't need to. My actions spoke louder than anything I could have said. I was thriving without them. I had reclaimed my dignity and strength, and that was worth more than any apology or hollow words they could offer. In the end, my revenge wasn't about destroying their lives. It was about rebuilding mine, stronger and more resilient than before. It was about proving to myself, and to them, that I was capable of moving on, of becoming the man I was always meant to be, without needing their approval or validation. They had tried to steal my wife, humiliate me, and break me down. But in the process, they had only helped me discover the strength within myself that I had long buried. And in the end, That was my ultimate revenge. I didn't need them to be whole. I was already complete without them.